Good afternoon, everyone. It is 1:01 p.m., and we're going to call this special meeting to order. Could I have a motion to adopt the agenda? Councillor Elmsley, seconded by Mayor Latham. All in favor? Motion carried. Is there any declarations of pecuniary interest here this afternoon? Seeing none, we'll move right into today's special public meeting. Just before we go into the presentation, I'd just like to remind everybody here today that this special meeting is being held as a direct result of a request from LPAT to gather information from affected residents directly as a result of possible boundary changes or candidate site locations. That's the focus of the meeting today. That's what the discussion is going to be around. There's no decisions that will be made here today. It is simply a fact-finding mission. Every deputation and all correspondence taken from today will be passed on to will be summarized, and the official record will be passed on to LPAT for their consideration. So at this point, we're going to go into 3.1 of our agenda, the official plan 2012 and general amended 13 appeals, urban settlement boundaries. Leah Barry. It's all yours, Leah.
Thank you. Members of the Planning Advisory Committee, we're here again. But we are here under very unique circumstances. In fact, this is going to be the first meeting of its kind held by the Planning Advisory Committee. Please allow me to explain. Joel, I trust that you will have our slideshow ready to roll. Thank you. So moving ahead to the next slide, I'll start by explaining why we're here today and then provide some context for how we got here. I'm going to note several key events over the last 20 years that contributed to that. We'll come back to the future and go over the proposed modified settlement boundaries and candidate sites and what they mean for us. Then we'll wrap things up by describing what we've heard from the community in response to the notice concerning these matters and what the next few steps in this appeal proceeding look like. Joel, slide please. We're not here for a statutory public meeting held pursuant to the Planning Act. We're also not here to only provide the committee and the public with an information report. Rather, we're here related to direction given by the Local Planning Appeal Tribunal in its February 9th order. The tribunal directed the city to do two specific things. First, to provide notice to the public that the tribunal is being asked to consider proposals to realign boundaries for the settlement areas of our 5 urban settlement areas, those being Bobcaygeon, Fenland Falls, Lindsay, Omemee, and Woodville. So there would be two effects from that realignment. First, removing from those settlement areas certain lands that are currently located within the appealed 2012 settlement boundaries. And secondly, potentially removing other sites from within the pre-2012 boundaries. The second direction from the tribunal is to then provide a summary of the response to the public notice that we delivered. So that is the direction to us from the tribunal. Notify the public of the proposed boundary realignments and summarize the public response to the tribunal. Staff and our advisors decided it would be beneficial to additionally provide a forum for the potentially impacted landowners, as well as the broader community, to hear more information about the appeal proceedings and to provide an additional avenue to receive feedback beyond phone, email, or regular mail in response to that notice. The Planning Advisory Committee is well established with respect to land use matters, and operates within a meeting format very well suited to receive public comments. So I'm going to take a step back to explain where this LPAT order originates. Joel, slide please. The outstanding appeals of the city's 2012 official plan and the related appeals of the general amendment, known to us as OPA 13 or Official Plan Amendment 13, those are matters concerning the settlement boundaries. Those were scheduled to be heard by the tribunal at the Phase 1 hearing that started on January 11th of this year. The tribunal sat for 5 days. During that time, the tribunal heard a motion which sought to bring into effect 2 draft orders. Those orders would have resolved the majority of the issues for the Phase 1 hearing. In support of that, the tribunal was presented with land use planning evidence, and that included witness statements, affidavits, and 2 statements of agreed facts that were signed by all of the expert planning witnesses in the Phase 1 proceedings, including the city's professional land use planning consultant. One of the 2 draft orders sought the tribunal's approval of modified settlement boundaries for the 2012 official plan. That would have resulted in revised schedules A2, A3, A4, and A5. Those are simply map references for the official plan schedules that contain the settlement areas of Bobcaygeon, Fenland Falls, Lindsay, Omemee, and Woodville. We'll take a closer look at those maps in just a moment. The other draft order sought the tribunal's approval of related policy modifications. So the tribunal decided to defer consideration of the motion and whether it represents good planning in the public interest until the next case management conference. Instead, directed the city to notify the public of the proposed modifications. So to be clear, it's the tribunal that is tasked with determining the exact location of the settlement boundaries, not staff, not this advisory committee, and not council. So with that in mind, I'm going to take a few more steps back before we start moving forward. Joel, slide please. Before the city adopted its first official plan for the amalgamated municipality in 2010, it was the Victoria County official plan from 1978 that provided direction for land use planning and development. And to the extent that certain policies in the 2012 official plan remain under appeal today, the Victoria County official plan continues to govern in those cases. So following council's adoption of the official plan in 2010, and as was required by the Planning Act, the official plan was forwarded to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing to be reviewed and to be granted final approval. Over the next year, a number of modifications were sought by the ministry, some of which were acceptable to the city, others weren't. And ultimately, the minister approved the modified official plan in January 2012. As a side note, that's why we refer to the city's official plan as the 2012 official plan. It was granted approval in 2012. As was also required by the Planning Act, following the minister's approval, therein ensued a statutory 20-day appeal period. The ministry received 15 appeals to the approval of the modified official plan, including an appeal by the city itself. So the city is a party to the appeal proceedings. The then Ontario Municipal Board, or OMB, and now Local Planning Appeal Tribunal, LPAT as of 2018, adjudicated upwards of 20 hearing events from 2012 onwards. And a number of those original 15 appeals have been settled or dismissed or withdrawn, bringing various parts of the city's official plan into effect. While the appeal proceedings carried on, the city continued to develop its land use planning policy framework and approved a series of official plan amendments between 2015 and 2017 to supplement the official plan. These amendments constituted the secondary plans for the 5 settlement areas of Bobcaygeon, Fenland Falls, Lindsay, Omemee, and Woodville, and also included a related general amendment, OPA 13. That general amendment, OPA 13, was prepared to refine urban settlement boundaries, to update and introduce new land use designations within the urban settlement areas, and also to meet a number of key provincial and local policies. All of these amendments were appealed, and they also are presently at the LPAT under separate file numbers. In an attempt to narrow and scope the extensive issues list that exceeded 530 issues, the tribunal agreed with our recommendations and, in its November 2018 order, directed the registered professional planners retained by the parties to the matters to attend meetings facilitated and led by city staff, together with our planning consultant, in order to determine whether any appellant issues could be resolved on consent, or whether any appellant issues that couldn't be resolved on consent could be consolidated, scoped, or focused to help create a more manageable issues list. The planners group made substantial progress in reaching consensus and narrowing the scope of the phase one hearing over 14 meetings throughout 2019. Last fall, further to direction from the tribunal, those planners representing all parties to the phase one hearing specifically participated in a series of like expert meetings where they applied collaborative problem solving to further refine the issues and simplify the phase one hearing. So that brings us to 2021 and the start of the phase one hearing in January, the February LPAT decision that resulted from that hearing, the notice we served of this meeting, and an update to council also in February. That lands us here to today's meeting. We head to council with a further update next and complete this chapter with our appearance at the tribunal's case management conference next month. The issues that are presently before the tribunal have a long and complex history. Having walked through the key events in that history, we're back to present day. So we'll spend the next few minutes talking about where we're going next. To do that, let's take a look at the exact mapping I referenced a few minutes ago, the 2012 official plan schedules A2, A3, A4, and A5. Joel, slide please. So we'll see the 5 urban settlement areas identified on the next few slides. So keep in mind, the urban settlement boundaries we see on these schedules are under appeal and not in effect. So schedules A2 and A4 identify the Woodville settlement area, amongst other surrounding land use designations and features. In A2 on the left, you'll find Woodville in the top left corner, while in A4 on the right, you'll find Woodville in the bottom left corner. Woodville happens to appear on 2 schedules to the official plan simply due to the scale of the grid that we used. Joel, slide please. Schedule A3 identifies the Lindsay and Omemee settlement areas. We see here that Lindsay is covered by its own local official plan for the town of Lindsay, and that remains in effect today. Joel. Schedule A5 identifies the Bobcaygeon and Fenland Falls settlement areas. Likewise, as with Lindsay, Fenland Falls is covered by its own local official plan as well. So before we move on, I'm going to emphasize a feature that we're going to see throughout the next few maps, and that's zoomed in on the far right-hand side of the screen. It's that light blue line that identifies the 2012 official plan settlement boundaries. As a result of the appeals the ministry received in 2012 to the minister's approval of the modified official plan, that light blue line that identifies the urban settlement boundary did not come into force and effect. So that's an important point and underpins why we're here today. The 2012 urban settlement boundaries that we see in these schedules are not in place today. So again, it's the tribunal that is tasked with determining the exact location of the settlement boundaries through the appeal proceedings. Okay, so now that we've seen the size and shape of the settlement areas according to the 2012 official plan under appeal, we're ready to take a look at what's presently before the tribunal. Joel, slide please. So, to recap, the tribunal is being asked to modify the schedules we just looked at. The expert land use planners involved in the Phase 1 hearing have worked through numerous contentious issues and developed a methodology to resolve the disputed settlement boundaries. The methodology provides the base rationale and planning justification to reflect the location of the boundaries for the 5 settlement areas that existed prior to the ministry's approval in 2012. The planning evidence involved complex analysis of the applicable provincial planning policies, the delineated built boundary as drawn by the province in 2008, the Victoria County official plan land use designations and indications of urban areas, and a host of other considerations for planned developments and municipal servicing infrastructure. The experts included these considerations in their methodology to develop a decision tree to guide decision making, and that resulted in the proposed modified boundaries. The same modified boundaries mapping was mailed to the potentially affected landowners and is referenced in the staff report as Appendix C. The proposed modified boundaries are essentially a way to maintain the status quo from the Victoria County official plan, despite the passage of time over the past 9 years. And so the map on the right identifies the pre 2012 settlement boundary for Fenland Falls as delineated by the expert witnesses. This same exercise was conducted for the other 4 settlement areas as well. Joel, slide please. So, as a result, if the tribunal approves the modified boundaries, that being the return to the status quo, certain lands that were originally shown as being located within the urban settlement boundary in the minister approved official plan from 2012 would no longer be located within the urban settlement boundary of the LPAT approved official plan going forward. But I shall pause and tell you that that's not the end of the story. In fact, in many ways, it's just the beginning of the work ahead of us in the policy shop here at the city. The modified boundaries would be in effect until the city's municipal comprehensive review, the MCR, or the official plan review, as it's also referred to. That's the provincially mandated conformity exercise to be completed by July 1st, 2022. That exercise, which is underway through our GMS, the Growth Management Strategy Project, requires the city to review its settlement area boundaries and plan for population growth, housing, and employment needs, and coordinate with infrastructure investments, all to the growth plan's forecast to the year 2051. The GMS exercise will include a comprehensive public engagement component where interested parties can participate and provide submissions and requests for the city's consideration as it relates to the location and use of their lands. It's through that exercise and completion of the land needs assessment work that the city can conclude whether or not urban boundaries should be expanded. So let's take a closer look at the transition from the appealed 2012 boundaries to the proposed modified boundaries, being that reconciliation with the pre 2012 framework. Joel, slide please. So we're looking at Bobcaygeon. The map on the right is the 2012 official plan boundary in light blue that was appealed. And on the left, identified by the black dashed line, is the proposed modified boundary for approval by the tribunal. The residual lands, those being the lands that fall in between, are highlighted in the next slide. Joel, please. The rose-colored lands highlight the residuals, again, those being the lands inside the 2012 appealed boundary, but outside the proposed modified boundary. When we zoom in on the upper left area of the community, we can also see a pocket of lands in gold proposed to be added into the urban boundary as a result of that decision tree exercise. We see this in all communities to varying degrees, with the exception of Lindsay, where no gold lands exist, meaning no lands are proposed to be added in through the modified boundaries. Moving forward, further adjustments are being proposed to the modified boundaries by various parties in the appeal proceeding that the province's new 2019 growth plan allows us all to consider. So we're going to take a look at those next, Joel. Establishing the settlement boundaries is a critical step to transition us into the next part of the appeal proceeding, centered on the candidate sites. So, this is probably a good juncture for a few comments on the provincial growth plan. Development, adoption, and approval of the official plan in 2012 were all subject to the preceding 2006 growth plan. Through that provincial policy, settlement area boundary expansion could only occur as part of a municipal comprehensive review, the MCR, and subject to specific criteria. Since then, the province released the 2019 growth plan. Based on the province's transition regulation, the LPAT determined that our 2012 official plan is subject to the 2006 growth plan, while OPA 13 and issues of urban settlement boundaries are subject to the 2019 growth plan. So the modified boundaries that we looked at in the past few slides were delineated to conform with the 2000 growth plan as was required of us. Turning our focus to the new 2019 growth plan, Section 2282 continues to provide that a settlement area boundary expansion may only occur through an MCR, subject to specific criteria. However, the 2019 growth plan now further provides in Section 2284 that municipalities may adjust settlement area boundaries without having to undertake an MCR. There's a list of criteria that would be required to be met. We also refer to these as tests, and the 5 tests are that there would be no net increase in land within settlement areas, that the adjustment would support the municipality's ability to meet the intensification and density targets established pursuant to the growth plan, that the location of any lands added to the settlement area will satisfy the other applicable growth plan policies, that the affected settlement areas are not rural settlements and that they're not in the Greenbelt area, and lastly, that the settlement area to which lands would be added is serviced by municipal water and wastewater systems, and that there's sufficient reserve infrastructure capacity to service those lands. So once the tribunal has made a determination on the location of the settlement boundaries pursuant to the 2006 growth plan, then the LPAT can adjudicate with respect to proposals that have been made by a number of the parties in the OPA 13 appeal proceeding to further adjust the boundaries pursuant to the 2019 growth plan, and particularly those tests that we just went over, policy 2284. In other words, provincial policy permits boundary adjustments, but first, boundaries need to be established in order to get adjusted. The establishing of the boundaries is what's being asked of the tribunal in the draft order. Next, the tribunal is being asked to determine the appropriateness of using policy 2284 to remove certain lands, those candidate sites, from the urban settlement area. Joel, slide please. So candidate sites are unlike the lands we've been talking about up until now. Those lands that were included in the expanded 2012 boundaries falling outside of the urban land use designation of the Victoria County official plan. Candidate sites instead are lands either wholly or partially within the urban land use designation in the Victoria County official plan, but fail to meet the criteria to facilitate development to an urban standard. And with that, I'm referring to our intensification and density targets to accommodate our forecasted population and employment growth to 2051. Candidate sites were evaluated against criteria that considered existing zoning, planned water and wastewater servicing, constraints due to land use compatibility, and the logical shape to the settlement boundary. The candidate sites represent land acreage that could be removed from one settlement area to adjust the boundary of that settlement area or another settlement area in the city. Again, provided the 2019 growth plan tests are upheld. So on the right of the slide, we're looking at Fenland Falls. The expert witnesses identified 4 candidate sites comprising 10 parcels of land, either wholly or partially, that met criteria, identifying their limitations to develop to an urban standard. So that included the zoning. Is it zoned rural or agriculture or development? And is it beyond planned water and wastewater servicing? Or is it zoned rural or agriculture or development and constrained due to land use compatibility? Or the third option, is it zoned rural or agriculture or development and the reassignment contributes to creating a more logical shape to the settlement boundary? If lands met one of these 3 criteria, they were identified as a candidate for reassignment, in other words, for removal from the urban area through the appeal proceeding. Joel, slide please. So it's going to be incumbent upon every party seeking an adjustment to demonstrate how the applicable provincial policies have been satisfied, particularly the test I referred to on the previous slide. So I'll recap from an earlier theme. Candidate sites that are removed from the settlement area through the OPA 13 appeal proceeding may be considered to be added back into the settlement area through our 2051 GMS exercise and our next official plan review over the next few years. The expert planners have signed a statement of agreed facts in which they indicate that, in their opinion, the candidate sites that don't get reassigned or removed may be considered as excess lands at the municipality's forthcoming official plan review. I'm going to pause here on this piece about excess lands just for a moment before we move on. So, according to the growth plan, excess lands are vacant, unbuilt, but developable lands, and here developable in the sense that they're located within an urban settlement area, but fall outside of the delineated built up area, those being the lands within the built boundary within which we can measure our minimum intensification targets. So these excess lands are in excess of what is needed to accommodate the forecasted growth to the planning horizon of the growth plan. Excess lands can be determined based on a land needs assessment. We're going to be doing exactly that through our GMS exercise. The city will determine which lands will be identified as excess lands, prohibit development on them to the planning horizon of the growth plan. The province further encourages us to reduce the land available for development where the city thinks that's appropriate. So it will be up to the tribunal to determine whether or not this is an appropriate approach at this time. And if it's not, then the city will revisit these sites through our GMS and official plan review. Joel, slide please. So let's take a look at Lindsay's sole candidate site, site L-1. At just under 23 hectares, it's within the pre-2012 urban area, but is zoned in a development category. And so given existing uses, without planned development or services, it's representative of lands that are unlikely to develop to an urban standard, and so fit the criteria to be recognized as a candidate site. Right, so we've discussed the official plan history, what led us here. We've distinguished the lands affected by the proposed modified boundaries versus those lands potentially affected by the candidates. We'll spend the next few minutes looking at the public consultation piece and then open the floor for feedback. Joel. So, notice of this meeting and the upcoming CMC was prepared by our legal team, and we circulated the notice by regular mail on February 16 to all impacted landowners. Through a GIS mapping exercise, we determined 139 properties may be affected by the proposed modified boundaries, while 40 properties may be affected by the 18 candidate sites. We've had a handful, eight, returned envelopes. And up until yesterday afternoon, we had 13 connections by either phone or email. There was a flurry of activity late yesterday, and that ended up bringing our tally to 18. In Bob Cajun, we had 5 connections, including a letter of objection as well as a letter of support. In Fenland Falls, 2 connections, both being letters of objection. In Lindsay, we had 3 connections, including a letter of objection and 2 letters of support. In Omimi, we made 4 connections, including 2 letters of objection. And in Woodville, 4 connections, including 1 letter of objection. So less than half of these connections were with landowners of candidate sites. The majority were with landowners of the modified boundaries lands. Landowners who connected with us asked for additional information. They asked to be notified of future matters concerning the appeal proceedings. They raised questions and identified concerns with misinformation that we were able to clarify, to explain, and to address. Others posed questions on zoning matters, the potential for zoning amendments, and the potential for severances. We received comments on legacy development plans and approvals, and comments that these matters shouldn't be dealt with in this way or at this time, given the constraints as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. In some cases, landowners presented new information, like recent zoning amendments that had not yet been consolidated and newer service connection information. Pre-development efforts that had been made by some landowners, things like detailed conversations with engineers, home builders, surveyors, and real estate lawyers, were also discussed with us. The number one question has been around implications of the changes. And I quote, "How does this impact the use of my property, my taxes, and my property value?" Having these one-on-one conversations with landowners has really been an opportunity to speak about concurrent and also forthcoming city initiatives, projects like our GMS and the official plan review, but also our comprehensive zoning bylaw project. We worked with the city's communications, advertising, and marketing team to develop a jump-in webpage to explain the LPAD order, to supplement the information in the notice, and to provide a whole host of other resources: the 2012 official plan and appealed schedules, the Victoria County official plan and its schedules, the comparison mapping of the proposed modified boundaries and candidate sites, excerpts of provincial policy, and information about today's PAC meeting, chronology of key dates, contact information for us, for the tribunal, and a feedback section that included a short survey. So as of this morning, the site had 190 visits, 155 downloads of various resources, about 18 in Bob Cajun, 13 in Woodville, and 11 in Fenland Falls, and even a few completed the surveys. Thank you. So naturally, having covered where we've been, where we are today, let's spend 1 more minute on where we're going next. Joel, last slide. Mr. Chair, all we ask of you in the committee today is to receive our report for information and to receive feedback from the public. Next, we'll provide a summary of public feedback to Council on March 23rd and receive any further direction from Council if they wish to provide to us as staff. There are no further Planning Act approval decisions before this committee or before Council. So as directed by the tribunal, we'll provide a summary of the public's response to the notice at the CMC April 6th. The tribunal will consider the motion presented during the Phase 1 hearing, including the 2 draft orders we noted earlier today. And also the tribunal will consider any new requests for party or participant status. The tribunal has previously scheduled the second phase of this hearing to commence on May 25th. Phase 2 deals with the balance of the appeals to OPA 13. those issues related to the growth plan conformity work done at the time, and also the piece linking the secondary plans to our official plan. So, Mr. Chair, that finally concludes my comments. I gladly turn things back to you. Thank you for this opportunity to present the information to you today, to the committee, and to the broader community.
Thank you very much, Leah. Members of committee, any questions of Leah on the presentation? Mayor Letham?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Leah, for the presentation. That actually helps clarify a lot for me anyways. Just a quick question. So this candidate sites is a fairly new thing that's come back from the tribunal, an interesting concept. Can you just tell me what will council's role be in these candidate sites moving forward? You know, when this comes back, what exactly will council's role be, if any, in deciding candidate sites, or is this strictly a tribunal decision at this point?
Thank you for the question. Mr. Chair, through you, the LPAT order from February 9th does give us some direction on exactly this matter. So I'll just refer to that LPAT decision. And in light of the new growth plan policy, the 2284 that we discussed today, that information wasn't available to council at the time it made its decision in 2010. So the LPAT is, as is permitted through the Planning Act, inviting council to consider the new information presented through the planning evidence at the hearing in terms of reconsidering the decision that they made.
Okay, thank you, I think. So just as a quick follow-up then, so council will be asked to consider or reconsider their decision based on the opportunity of these candidate sites, but at this point, these would just be recommendations from council to LPAT. Is that, am I correct? I mean, that final decision will be made by LPAT, and we as a council we can make a recommendation if we choose, we can forward it, but the ultimate decision on the boundaries, the final boundaries, will be made by the tribunal. Is that correct?
Yes, I think that you've put that in exactly the way that it's intended and how I understand the LPAT decision to read.
Thank you.
Any further questions of committee on the presentation? Okay, seeing no further questions at this point, we'll move into the public portion of the meeting. So at this point, if there are any members of the public wishing to speak to the matter of the proposed boundary changes or candidate sites proposed for LPAT, if you want to come forward to speak now, I just remind you before you start to state your name for the record, and you have 5 minutes to present your case.
We can just start going through the list. So the first on our list is Donna McAlpine.
Go ahead, Bruce. You're on mute. You're on mute, Bruce.
How's that?
There you go. Go ahead, Bruce.
Thank you. I'm speaking on behalf of Donna and Bruce McAlpine. Donna's the brains and I'm the spokesperson here. I would like to say that our presentation that we have presented to the committee, to the best of my knowledge, indicates our position on the matter, and I don't know whether the committee have this information in front of them. If there are any questions, I would certainly try to answer them or find information to respond in the future. Beyond the presentation that we presented, I don't think I have anything at this time, other than I would like to say that Leah Berry deserves congratulations for presenting the situation in a very succinct manner and avoiding legalese to the best of her ability. And I think I understand most of what she said. Thanks, Leah.
Thanks, Bruce. So I can confirm that your correspondence have been received and will be part of the official record. And at this time, if there's any members of committee that have any questions for clarification of Mr. and Mrs. McAlpin, you can ask those now. Seeing none, it looks like you and Don have done a good job, Bruce. It's pretty concise. So thank you for chiming in today. Next on the list, Joel.
Next, we have Francis Ferguson.
Hello, Francis. Go ahead. Oh, I think we've, oh, are you there, Francis?
Yes, I am.
Are you there, Francis?
I think I presented my case in the letter, and if it is in front of members of this meeting, if you have any questions, I'd be prepared to answer them.
Okay, thanks, Francis. I can confirm that your correspondence have been received. The committee members have them in front of them. Committee, do you have any questions of Francis at this time? Seeing none, thank you for submitting that, Francis. It'll be part of the official record and forwarded on to LPAT.
Thank you.
James Webster and crew.
There we go. It's Jim speaking. I'm here in Fenelon Falls with my two planning consultants, Doug Carroll, whom I believe is known to all of you, and also David Johnson, who is known to some of you. One of David's many claims to fame is that he was the Victoria County planning director for a period of years in the late 70s and 1980s. And your permission, Dave would like to make a few comments, and then Doug will follow up with some more detailed comments because I'm somewhat discombobulated by this whole exercise. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry, we're not hearing you, David.
Oh.
There, that sounds better. No, we're still not hearing you.
Any better now?
That's better.
Okay. I'll try and keep my remarks brief, but the LPAT decision that
Oh, we keep losing you, David. As soon as you turn away from the computer, we lose the sound.
okay. Can you hear me now?
That's good. Go ahead.
Okay. If I might, the LPAT decision that was released on February the, I think it was 6th, 9th.
We're losing. We've got no sound from you, David. Maybe do you want to try without the video and just the sound?
Sure. Can you hear me now?
Are you there, David?
Can you hear me now?
Yep, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. The LPAT decision, subsection 10 of it, noted that the active for considerable time, and the tribunal informed all the parties that they want these matters resolved in an expeditious and fair manner, which I think is something that we'd all wish for.
You're coming in and out, David. I'm just not sure whether you're speaking directly into the microphone on the computer.
Trying to. The second point, and I think very important, and the mayor touched on this in his question to Leah, that the LPAT panel is very interested in council's position on the matters that are being reviewed today. The actual decision said that council be afforded the opportunity to reconsider its decision on the plan in light of the information and material provided and make a written recommendation to the tribunal subject to any prescribed timelines. And what we took that to mean was that council, after hearing everybody's submissions, would have an opportunity to say, yeah, we agree with that, or no, we don't think that's appropriate, so that they would know what the thinking was of council in their consideration and final decision on the matter. Just wanted to bring that to your attention. And that was item 2 of their decision, and it was, I think, subsection, the last subsection of the decision was 33, and the only thing that came after that was no further notice will be given. So what I'm trying to say to you is you do have a full opportunity to provide your opinion on what should be done. And I think that's important for them to have council's decision. Thank you very much. Now I'll turn it over to Doug.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Am I still on audio?
We're not hearing you, Doug.
Better, Mr. Chairman?
Are you there, Doug?
Yes,
Yep, we can hear you now.
I'll leave the video off.
Go ahead.
With regards to the proposed modifications, am I on?
Yep, we can hear you.
Thank you. The proposed modifications intend to remove the urban settlement designation and boundary from 2 hectares of Black Bear's land that were designated in 1980 by Official Plan Amendment 14 to the county OP. At that same time, the same amendment applied the rural estate designation to the abutting 15 hectares of Black Bear's lands. Black Bear applied for a plat of subdivision on this property in 2007 to the city. That was unable to be processed because of the 2006 provincial policy statement. Now the provincial policy statement permits this land to be serviced, included in the boundary, and proceed on to development. But only if you agree to keep the land inside the urban boundary. And that's why we provided to you in our letter yesterday the resolution for your consideration and council's subsequent consideration. We have an engineer's report, we have an archaeologist's report that the land can be serviced. There are no archaeological interests. The land can be serviced to provide approximately 170 dwelling units. And that's from the pipes that exist at the end of the streets right now that abut this property. So for 35 years, the land has been designated for residential development. They applied in 2007 to proceed with that, and they could not. We hope now that we'll be able to proceed with council's approval to the modifications that keep the urban settlement area boundary, including a minimum of 2 hectares to a maximum of 17 hectares of Black Bear's land at the northwest corner of the Fenelon Falls settlement boundary. If you have any questions further to our submission, I'm happy to answer them, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim, David, and Doug. I can confirm that that your letter has been received and the committee has it in their hands and will be part of the official record. Members of committee, do you have any questions for the deputant?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, go ahead.
My prior comments were with respect to the proposed modifications. I have similar comments with the proposed removal of the urban settlement area boundary from 4.3 hectares.
Sorry, we're losing you, Doug. Hello?
Thank you. Back on there or not?
Yep.
Thank you. We also provided a letter to the city clerk's office to council's attention regarding the potential removal of the urban settlement boundary from 4.3 hectares of Black Bear lands that have been designated since 1989 in the Fenelon Falls official plan. We've not been provided with any information by planning staff as to why that land is suddenly no longer suitable.
We've lost you again there, Doug. I can confirm that 2 letters with regard to Black Bear Estates was received and are part of the official record.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll trust the committee to recommend the appropriate resolution and council to deal with it.
Thank you very much, gentlemen.
We have Tom and Marilyn Bent.
Hello, Mr. Bent, go ahead.
Yes. How are you doing?
Very good, thank
Can
you.
hear me? We put in the concern for the piece just north of the village of Omimi. My family has lived on this property for nearly 100 years, 3 generations, and we've always paid taxes into the town of Omimi. The 27.65 acres that I mentioned here that were in the town limits was come from the impact assessment, and we feel it's right. Yeah, if Omimi is going to grow in the next 30 years, which way do you think Omimi is going to grow?
Keep going. Do your thing.
I think I'm opposed to this because it'll impact the value of the properties in question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bent. I can confirm that your correspondence has been received. It's in the package for the committee members and will be part of the official record of today's meeting. Committee members, any questions for Mr. Bent? Seeing none, thank you very much for your correspondence and your comments today.
We have no further people registered online right now.
Is there any other members of the public wishing to speak to this matter this afternoon? Is there any other members of the public wishing to speak to this matter? Last and final call, any other members of the public wishing to speak to this matter? Seeing and hearing none, we'll move on to deputations, which we have none. We'll now move on to correspondence, which we have quite a number of pieces of correspondence. So I'll need a motion to receive the correspondence and include them as part of the official record of today's meeting. Councillor Elmsley, seconder. Mike Barkwell, any discussion? All in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, I'm just going to, we've got a motion and it's carried to receive the correspondence and include them as part of the official record. So I'm just going to go through and read off the names of who we received correspondence from. So we've got Tom and Marilyn Bent. We've got Ryan McQuaid, McQuaid General Contracting Limited. Mr. and Mrs. Bruce McAlpine, Francis Ferguson, Brent and Sharon Drew, Dale Woodcock, James Webster, and we've got two pieces of correspondence from James Webster. Tom, and I'm going to mess up this last name, Halinski. And we have two pieces of correspondence from Mr. Tom Halinski. We've got correspondence received from Alan Webster, Nicholas Makos, and that's two pieces from Mr. Makos. And I think that's it. I haven't missed anybody, have I, Joel?
I think that everyone that we received, and I've been in contact with Leah to make sure that all the people that have reached out to her are also included. And so we will ensure that the minutes reflect everyone who has written correspondence.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So that's it for correspondence, which brings us down to motion for, sorry, yes, so the report, I need to have a motion to receive the report. Would somebody, Mayor Latham, seconded by Deputy Mayor O'Reilly. Any discussion? All in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. Motion for adjournment? Sure. Is Leah still online? Go ahead, Mayor Love.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just a quick follow-up, Leah, if you don't mind, just for clarification. I'm intrigued by this conversation about input into the candidate sites, and I'm just wondering, do you know how will the process unfold regarding council and these recommendations for candidate sites if we go there? I know these recommendations and these appeals or objections, I guess, we'll summarize, we'll send them off to LPAT. And I know on the 23rd, we're making a couple of decisions, March 23rd at council, but nothing right now regarding any recommendations toward candidate sites. So is this all going to the tribunal in May? They'll make a decision at that point whether to pursue the candidate site proposal. And if they do at that time, it'll come back to council for any kind of recommendations or proposals on our end. Is that kind of the process that we're looking at?
Yeah, thanks for your question, Mayor Letham. And Mr. Chair, through you, I'll attempt addressing your question here by referring to perhaps your earlier comment and question. And as it relates to the candidate sites, although the LPAT in its decision has invited council to provide written comments regarding their reconsideration of their previous decision if they want to, the only motion before LPAT presently is comprised of the two draft orders that I referred to earlier in this presentation. One being about the policy modifications to the official plan, and the second being the modified boundary. And that's specific to the mapping that is part of the report under Appendix C. The modified boundaries, or rather the maintaining the status quo, the return to the pre-2012 boundaries. Those are the only two matters within the orders as part of the motion that the LPAT has in front of it that it will be deciding on, as we're to understand from their decision, on April 6th at the CMC. There isn't presently a motion in front of LPAT concerning the candidate sites. And if I may just take a step further, our city solicitor will again remind council and bring an update March 23rd regarding that motion, and specifically those two orders on policy modifications and the modified boundaries mapping to seek further direction to staff. Whether council chooses to provide any recommendation about the candidate sites is entirely up to council to do.
But if we were going to provide any feedback regarding the candidate sites, would we be asked to do that on March 23rd or at a later date?
What I understand through you again, Mr. Chair, is that direction that we're seeking from council is specific to the motion in front of LPAT, and that's limited to the two draft orders that don't involve the candidate sites.
Thank you.
Thanks, Leah. Anything further from committee today? Somebody like to make a motion for adjournment? Mayor Letham, seconder. James or Jason, all in favor? Motion carried. Thank you. That concludes our special public meeting this afternoon. Thank you for everybody for joining us. Thanks, Leah.
Thank you.